Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Colonel Chris Wyatt, retired U.S. Army, sitting in central Pennsylvania. And we have I don't know if it's a ground shaking, earth shaking. It's certainly probably more powerful than the 2.2 magnitude on the Richter scale earthquake that we heard in Joburg, centered in Soweto just a day or two ago. This is a little bit bigger than that, I think. But this is a conversation about South Africa's Employment Equity Act. Much we've heard about that of late. And this specific conversation is with Anton van der Bijl, who is from the Solidarity labor organization there. And well, it's more than just a labor organization. It started as a labor union, but it's involved in many other things, including with AfriForum, among other things. But he's a deputy CEO of Solidarity and head of the legal team, which litigates primarily labor matters. And that's what we're here to talk about. I know that you may not be aware of this because it's not in the news. If you look at News 24, IOL, Daily Maverick, I can find virtually no mention of this story whatsoever. But courtesy of some folks we know from the organization, I received notice the other day and saw a post online that Solidarity reached a major agreement with through the International Labor Organization of the United Nations, of all organizations, the UN helping South Africa. Shocker here. But the ILO reached a mediation agreement, if we understand it correctly, with Solidarity and South Africa's Department of Labor. This agreement was to deal with race matters. And if I understand it correctly, we're going to have Anton explain all this in just a second. But if I understand it correctly, the deal with this is that race can no longer be the sole consideration in sacking someone in South Africa. Now, the problem I have with that is that maybe I don't understand it fully. That's why we have Anton on here to explain it. The other issue is that I have a real problem if it's only in sacking people. Race should never be a consideration in employment whatsoever. That's my view, of course. You know where I stand on that. I think the fact that people include race as part of hiring or entry into university or contracts awarded to businesses is simply racism, conferring advantage on one group of people over another based on skin pigmentation. It's morally reprehensible. That's my view. Anton is an attorney, if I'm not mistaken, so he'll probably correct me on all these things. But with that, we have our guest this morning at an unusual hour, Anton van der Bijl from Solidarity. Anton, hoe gaat dit?
Chris, yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It's a great honor for me to be on the show. And yeah, I look forward to the debate and the discussion. Yeah, thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Anton, what have I gotten wrong in this conversation? Did I get anything wrong in my opening, or is that accurate? Can you fill us in on what exactly does this agreement mean?
Yeah, I think, Chris, yeah, the gist of it, you stated quite correctly. But I'm just going to give you a brief background, and then we can have the discussion in terms of the settlement and what's the consequences of the settlement. Yeah, this follows the complaint that we lodged at the International Labour Organization, which is part of the UN. We lodged the complaint in 2021, and we say Solidarity said in that specific complaint that South Africa contravenes the Convention 111 of the ILO. South Africa is a signatory of that convention. And what that convention in essence says is that you as a signatory party to the convention needs to take into account certain factors when you apply affirmative action. We call it in South Africa affirmative action. I know in other countries it's called employment equity or transformation imperatives, but in South Africa we call it affirmative action. So as a signatory party to that specific convention, you are obliged to follow the prescripts of that convention, and South Africa needs to comply with the convention. The complaint that we lodged, we say, no, South Africa, you contravenes the convention. And we specifically stated that the convention says affirmative action and employment equity imperatives needs to be temporary. There must be a start and the end to affirmative action. And secondly, affirmative action and the application thereof needs to be enhanced. So you cannot elevate certain factors and then only focus on that specific factors. So the complaint was lodged, and yeah, then we went into a mediation process with the government. That happened the past 10 months or so. And yesterday was the culmination of that mediation process, the settlement that was reached.
So, Anton, let me see if I understand correctly what you said. So, South Africa, as a member of the United Nations, falls under this Convention 111. That's a convention of the International Labor Organization. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's one of the conventions of the ILO.
Okay, so that's the first one. So that's the first point. The next point I want to ask is the Employment Equity Act amendment that was coming, that was going to make all these quotas and force people to be hired, force people to be sacked. Is that affected by this? It sounds like it may be, because that seems demonic, the effort this year, which was going to cause potentially over 500,000 job losses for people currently employed in the private sector.
Yes. Yeah, to a certain extent, Chris, yes. I think it will affect that specific amendments, although it's not explicitly stated in the settlement agreement that the amendments are withdrawn or cannot proceed. So that's not explicitly stated in the settlement agreement. But the effect of the settlement agreement, as we see it, is that the whole effect of the amendments is not circumvented but negated by the settlement, or the effects of an amendment are negated by the terms of the agreement. And why we say this, if you look at the amendment, specifically Section 15A of that amendments, the Minister of Labour is given, or Minister of Employment and Labour is given, wide range powers to make sectoral determination in terms of employment equity and affirmative action. And he has done so. About 2 months ago in regulations, the Minister of Labour said no, in employment equity and the establishing of employment equity plans, the target for black employees is 79%. So each and every, or appointments must be made in terms of the demographic statistics. So 79% of each and every position or positions needs to be allocated to black employees, about 9.2% to white employees, and so I can go on. But yeah, the main gist of the settlement agreement says you cannot only look at demographics, you can not only look at the economically active population. You need to look at various factors. Employment equity needs to be nuanced. So yeah, in a nutshell, the amendment act may proceed. We are not sure what's going to happen with that, but the effect of this settlement agreement is that it negates the effect of that amendment, in the sense that the EAP and demographics is not the only factor that needs to be taken into account when appointing and promoting in South Africa.
Now, as a layperson, not an attorney, that was what I inferred. It doesn't sound like it goes far enough, but it seems like an agreement that on its surface would prevent them using it as a sole criteria. But let me ask you this question, because I have a significant issue with someone's skin pigmentation being considered at all, whether it's on that side or this side. We just had a landmark decision here by the Supreme Court of the United States, which on its surface looks amazing, but I think the actors behind the scene at these universities like Harvard and University of North Carolina, and employers that have been using this vile, these are my words, not yours, this vile approach to employment and to entry into university, have been using this to discriminate against Americans, and they're just simply going to find another way to do it, because the Supreme Court made this decision, handed it down, and the reaction from the political left was that, well, this is going to throw us into chaos for 5 years. Without them spitting the words out, it essentially came out the context. Yeah, for 5 years, it's going to take us that long to find another way to still use race to get around this decision. That's what's happening here in the States. That's a lay perspective, but I suspect that I'm 100% correct. Just to give you an example of what's happened here. In America, of course, the demographics are flipped the opposite. White Americans are the majority, the vast majority of this country, despite the fact that we changed our immigration system back in the 1960s to let millions of people of color come into this country, reducing the white majority, not the population, but the majority's percentage from 89 down to 75, 76%, which is what it's at today, out of 330 million people. But despite the fact that 75% of Americans are white, Harvard University's admissions have gone from, at the time when the country is over 80% white, they've gone from 85% white student admissions in 1980 to 38% today. So the demographics don't even remotely match what the population is. Now, the problem I have with that is that I don't have a problem if white students are only 38% of the incoming class at Harvard. I have a problem if they're only 38% because other groups have been elevated based on skin color. And I'd have the same problem if there were 90% black students in South Africa and they were reduced to 20% because only white students, if you get my point. Using skin color is a real problem. Am I off base here? Why exactly did Solidarity on behalf of South Africans 2 years ago begin to pursue this thing? Did they have the same feeling as me, or is there another reason Solidarity wanted to get this stricken from employment?
Yeah, most certainly. That's one of the reasons that we started this process. Just to confirm what you have said, if you look at the book of Thomas Sowell, Affirmative Action Around the World, you will see that it talks about the United States affirmative action policies, and it states unequivocally it hasn't succeeded in what it set out to achieve. So I must agree with you, and I've read that, or to a certain extent, I've read that landmark judgment of in the US, and it's quite interesting. So yeah, but that's one side remark that I want to make. Yeah, we started this process because the application of affirmative action in South Africa has become a race-based obsession by the ANC. That's what's happening. There's nothing about transformation or rectifying the past. Nothing. If you look at each and every policy, it's about the pigmentation of your skin. It's race-based policy, and that's clear in each and every policy in South Africa. We are the most race. We have the most race laws almost in the whole of the world. And at the end of the day, we say this cannot go on like it's going at this point in time. If you apply for a job, if you apply for promotion, the only factor that's taken into account is the national demographics. So they say each and every workplace, each and every sector and level in a workplace needs to reflect the demographics of South Africa. And we say that's not a practical solution. So, yeah, we refer the matter, and our argument at the end of the day is there's a big gap between the skills provided in South Africa and the realities and the jobs being created. So you sit with the massive skills gap, especially, and it's a proven fact, in the black population in South Africa. The government has done nothing to make sure that rural education, there's proper rural education and skills development amongst black South Africans. So you sit with this massive skills gap, and at the end of the day, you sit with the government that says, now, irrespective of the skills gap, 79% of promotions and appointments must be allocated to black South Africans. So, yeah, to concur, to agree with you, this race-based obsession and fixation, that was the main reason that we referred the matter to the ILO, and that was our main argument at the end of the day.
Well, it seems to me that this race obsession that the African National Congress has, that not South Africans have. I mean, look, I know Tswana, I know Xhosa, I know Zulu, I know Basotho, I know Afrikaners and English speakers, Portuguese, South Africans. Very few of them seem to be obsessed with race, whether it comes to employment or society or so-called inequality and equity. But this ANC seems to be absolutely demonically possessed with race. And to me, it seems from my perspective that it has very little to do with righting historical wrongs. It seems to be a lot more about enriching cadres through this sort of thing and punishing other South Africans. Now, maybe my analysis is wrong, but I don't think I am. Do you think I'm off base on this, or is that a fair assessment?
I think you are rather generous in your assessment. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's cadre deployment. It's the corruption in South Africa is strive. So no, most certainly you are correct in that assessment.
Well, the thing about this is, and which irritates me, and it became painfully obvious in two cases, and now a third case. Let me just run through them very quickly and give you quick thoughts. It's kind of, It's tied not to employment, but to this race obsession. The first was when the Tourism Relief Fund was created at the beginning of the lockdown. It was specifically had language said that non-black companies could not get. Now, the amount of money was a joke. It was like 50,000 rand. That's not going to save a business unless you're you're driving a combi around taking people from place to place, or you got a tuck shop that's near a tourist site. It's not going to save a hotel or a lodge. But when you come up with race-based programs like the Tourism Relief Fund, you discriminate against all South Africans. I mean, who do you think it was employed in those lodges, those hotels, those touring companies? Is it just white folks? Is it just Indians, just colors? No, it's all South Africans. It just seems rather self-defeating to do that. So that's the first one. The second is that a couple of years ago in the semifinals of netball, the netball team that won a very contentious and well-played game, the girls won the semifinal and they were supposed to go on to the final. They're dancing and jumping up and down for joy on the floor. When the officials come over and say, no, you forfeit the game. They're like, why? Well, because you didn't have enough white players on the court. What? Yes, well, the rules require that X number, 2 white players be on the court at all times. One of the white players was injured. The only player they had that could go in was a black player. The black player went in. They won the game, and the black player was only in for like 5 minutes. That's just bat crap crazy in my mind. And now let's flip the charts over because, of course, bigots and racists will accuse me of only siding with white South Africans when I'm siding with all South Africans. So fortunately, I have that story to fall back on because now I'm very angry as a Western Province fan seeing the under-16s team being relegated down, losing after winning a semifinal. They should have gone on to play I think it was the Free State. Instead, it was the Bulls that went on there. But Western Province under-16s, because they had too many white players, not enough transformation. This isn't about transformation. This is about, to me, it's like revenge and get even. It's certainly not improving things. I mean, if the South African Rugby Union, for instance, wanted more black players, then for the past 30 years, they would have invested in local rugby programs all over the country, introducing the sport in places like Khayelitsha and Gugumela and Alexandra and, in remote locations out in the bush instead of simply demanding that today you have X number of people of color. Anyway, all of those things seem to me, Anton, to be self-defeating and not really focused on changing things in South Africa. What say you? Have I missed the mark on this?
Yeah, no, I'm completely in agreement with you. If you look at the tourism fund, it was specifically stated that as the terms and conditions of that fund that the money is allocated in terms of only 51% black-owned companies could receive that funding. So we referred that matter to various courts. We ended up in the Constitutional Court, which is our highest court. And there the court, at the end of the day, decided not to deal with the merits. But in essence, what has happened is our Supreme Court judgment stood the test of time, and the Constitutional Court elected not to turn that over. So in essence, what the Constitutional Court argued is it's simply wrong and unfair to discriminate when you have such a pandemic or such a thing as the COVID-19 pandemic to only allocate funds based on race. It's irrational, it's illogic, and it's unlawful. So that's the Constitutional Court's judgment on that specific matter. And then you referred to the netball matter. We also did a Constitutional Court matter, the Renata Barnard matter, and through our arguments in that specific matter, what came out was the Barnard principle. So the Barnard principle in South Africa says that there can be some sort of discrimination even between the designated group. So you can have although colored persons and black persons in South Africa form parts of the designated group which needs to be benefit or which can benefit from employment equity. The Barnard principle says 79% of positions must be allocated to black employees and only 8.9 or 7% needs to be allocated to colored persons. So you sit with this Barnard principle, and the irony of this whole thing is it's yet again a fixation with demographics of South Africa. It will never work for a colored person which has been disadvantaged through our past, to tell him you are not black enough to reap the benefits of affirmative action is absolutely ridiculous. And there's no other word to describe that. So, yes, there is a need. What we say is the only way in which you can ensure that South Africa becomes more equal, or that equality reigns in South Africa, is if you grow the economy, and if you invest in education and skills, especially in the designated group. That's the only way for us to, if you grow the economy, you will establish, or you will get more jobs. And if you invest in skills and education, you will get more persons from the designated group which can get employed. So that's the only way that true transformation and equality will happen in South Africa.
Well, I think the only way that's really going to happen from my perspective is if people had been patient, and if South Africa followed the path that I recommended in 1994, and that is South Africa had some of the best primary and secondary education on the planet, bar none. I mean, the private schools in South Africa were on par or better than Eton at one time. A few still are. And instead of addressing the schools that weren't at that level and raising them all up and getting proper education has gone backwards in South Africa. Mm-hmm. You know, Cyril Ramaphosa is fond of saying Bantu education was no education at all. And I agree. ANC Bantu education is no education at all. It's kind of where we sit today. But there's a few questions I'd like to get in here before we lose you, because you're going to head out. We've got you just for a short time today. But if we can just bring a few questions in from the audience. One, there's several versions of it that have been put out here, but essentially, let me read a couple and then I'll frame the question for you. So, Joking Atheist says, what kind of oversight will they have or actionable function that they can expect to meet the agreements achieved? And then Arctic says, okay, if the ANC doesn't comply with the agreement, then what? So basically the point here is there any force of law? I did read in the Solidarity announcement that there'll be a court order which employers must follow. So will this inclusion be added to the Employment Equity Act as another amendment, or will it simply be an agreement and then mediated by the ILO, and then there's a court order saying you must do this? Where do we stand on that for enforcement?
There's a specific clause in the settlement agreement which says it must form part of the regulations that's going to be promulgated in 2023. So it will form part of secondary legislation in South Africa. Primary legislation is our statutes, but yeah, regulations form parts of our legislation. So it will be regulations will follow. And thereafter, it will also be made an order of court. And when it's an order of court, then you can enforce the settlement agreement by means of court processes. So there's a lot of enforcement mechanisms built into the settlement agreement. And the second question may be, how can it be enforced in the workplace? In South Africa, we have, in most bigger workplaces, we have employment equity forums where employment equity is discussed and analyzed and plans are drafted. So through that forums and through the workings of the Department of Labor, our Department of Labor, that the settlement will be enforced.
All right, well, that does help out a bit there, but most of my viewers, as you can imagine, are quite skeptical that this will, actually be beneficial. And let me give a reason, and I'm sure that you're well informed on this, but the reason why they seem to try to run the clock out here. Two examples. The damage was done in the case with the netball girls. I mean, for those not from South Africa, Australia, or the UK, England, netball is a very popular sport for high school girls, and it's actually a sport they can play professionally in Australia and England and make a living from it. and or get scholarships to go to university. And what happened is that the girls who won that game legitimately were denied their victory, set aside. Another team went forward, and now scouts and television who could have seen the talent of these girls never saw it and don't know, potentially lost out. It's kind of like the transgender issue going on in interstates where biological males are racing and taking scholarships and trophies away from female athletes of excellence. So the harm was done. There's no remediation or approval for those girls to fix that situation. And it's the same thing with the Tourism Relief Fund. I appreciate what you guys did with the lawsuits going forward there and the decision in North Haltang High Court that was reversed and so on with the Tourism Relief Fund. But the damage was done. The money was gone. It only benefited people who met the right skin pigmentation, and there was no recompense after the fact. This government seems hell-bent on using the rule of law to discriminate against South Africans to the benefit of their favored class of cadres, not even the favored black South Africans, but the favored class of cadres, because that seems to be the outcome all the time. It seems like organizations like Solidarity, AfriForum, DRSA, and a host of other civic organizations have to have a constant legal battle going on just to stop this assault on what I would say is a decency. All right. What have I missed? Did I get that wrong? Is that incorrect statement, any of that?
No, I think that's the general. There's a lot of skepticism in terms of the settlement, and rightly so. We sit with the government that's hell bent on not complying with international standards and court cases and court orders. So, and cadre employment and political ideologies. But yeah, we sit with this. What has happened in South Africa has happened, but we sit with the settlement agreement. We think it's a good thing for South Africa. It's an extremely good thing for South Africa, and it sets the base for employment equity and transformation and affirmative action going forth in South Africa. So I think it's extremely historical good settlement agreement, and we need to take that into account and work with that. What has happened in South Africa has happened. Yes.
No, I agree with you, Anton, and I'm not trying to throw shade on the hard efforts that Solidarity has done the last 2 years to get to this point. I'm just saying my audience is skeptical, but you've done something that's now preemptive, preventative. You're trying to stop discrimination going forward, which is awesome. Yes. Thank you guys for that effort there. You know, it's interesting. Speaking of the Western Province Under 16 team, you know, I love I'm a big fan of the quote is I love all the Indian and white players that are on the Bafana team. Oh, wait, there aren't any. I guess it doesn't apply. I guess that doesn't apply when it comes to football. Just saying. Only to rugby, so in netball. Just saying. Anyway, but there was an unrelated question, and this is one that might be helpful for South Africans. I'm sure you're well aware that many minorities are discriminated in the workplace and can't find government employment or get bumped from jobs in the private sector. As a trade union, this isn't an issue to this specifically, but you might be able to answer this. As a trade union, does Solidarity have any sort of, I don't know, do they have a jobs board or a jobs program or something? Is that a function that Solidarity does, or a place you can refer people to if you're looking for employment? Here's a place you might be able to find a job. I don't know if that's a role of Solidarity, but one of my viewers asked the question, and I've been asked that in the past, and I don't have an answer for it. Do you?
Yes, we have. South African employees can just look at our webpage. We have it's an Afrikaans werknet. So if there's someone that needs employment or needs to upskill himself, we have various. You have been to Soltech, so we have a technical college, which ensures that our constituents have the necessary skills to form part of the employment market. And then we have werknet. If you need some sort of work, there's a placement process. So we have that, and I think it works at the end of the day. We have seen that a lot of white workers in South Africa doesn't get work due to the pigment of their skin. So we need to make sure that these imbalances are balanced through means of our own initiatives.
Well, that's pretty awesome to hear. Like I said, I wasn't aware of that. That's a good question. I'm not looking for employment, so it wasn't first and foremost in my mind. Although maybe with Biden inflation, I might need a job sometime soon. Even one paying in rand at this point, it's eating me alive here. I just paid my car insurance, and I haven't had a claim, and I've been accident free for decades, and it went up 12% from 1 month to the next, and I've never made a claim. And my insurance company is profitable. It's actually owned by the members, and they return, capital return to members each year. And I'm like, why did I get a capital return this year when you've increased my premiums by 12%? What's going on there? That's that buy deflation kicking in. But seriously, well, thanks for sharing that. It's pretty awesome. Just this is for my audience. Someone I haven't seen here before, Basil Cornelius, writes a question, says, this is unrelated, Anton, just to let him know. Why does the number of viewers watching not change? I have 3 members of my family who joined at the same time, and your numbers didn't go up. Well, Basil, not to whine about the harassment on this platform, but I'm clearly have a target on my back from YouTube. And the numbers of people you see on a live broadcast and watching my videos doesn't reflect the actual data of the number of people watching this. We know that, I mean, there's no way in God's green acre that me, some guy from the States who shows up in South Africa, goes throughout the country and in a 1 month period that I'm aware of, 27 different times all over the country, people have come up to me and go, Colonel Wyatt, oh, you know, that just doesn't happen in a country of 60 million people if 50 or 100 people are watching. We know the numbers are much higher than that. So just bear with it. I'm dealing with it as best I can until I find some rich, white monopoly capitalist who will sponsor me for my own website, and then we'll run it that way. But until I get some white monopoly capital or a cater backing me, we're kind of stuck with the free platform of YouTube. Anyway, so that answers Basil's question. Sorry, a little distraction there, Anton, but that question comes up a lot. And when I answer it, I usually get accused of crying about it, but I'm not crying. I'm just answering the gentleman's question. But Anton, you've got to hit the road, literally, hit the pavement. So I want to thank you for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Is there anything about this decision, this mediation that you guys reached, is it continuing? Is it over for now? Are you pursuing another aspect of this? Will you go back, for instance, and address either with the courts in South Africa or back to the ILO these rules that were put in place, which you believe now this judgment might stop, or you're going to try to get them removed, or they're just going to leave these things in place that say, you've got to have these levels. You can only have 9% of whites, and half have to be women, half have to be men, and Indians and colors. Is that something you're going to address, or is this issue closed for now? And what's the next step in all this?
No, this is only the winning of one battle. We still need to win the war, and the war is going ahead. We still are going to the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination of the UN at the end of the year. We are drafting a shadow report. We have various cases against the government. So yeah, this is only one of the battles that has been won, but the war needs to continue. Whilst we sit with this employment equity, affirmative action, black economic empowerment acts, and the regulations and the policies, we need to go on with the war. So yeah, no, we'll proceed with everything that we have.
Well, I want to say bye donkey. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Anton, particularly as a weekend comes up here. I'm sure my viewers appreciate it, those who latch on to this. Again, the dearth of reporting. I have yet, now maybe they've run a story, but I can't find it. I'm a subscriber. I actually pay News 24 to have access to their site, but I can't find a story on their site anywhere about this. This should be front page news everywhere. I mean, look at, it's not the same, but something akin to it is the Supreme Court decision, and that's all over. I mean, poor Joe Biden is like, this is not a normal court. We can't let people go to university just because the color of their skin. It's so wrong. I'm sorry. I was just doing my best Joe Biden there. Anyway, yeah, but thank you very, very much. Bye, donkey. And I wish you a pleasant weekend, and we'll chat again. Perhaps maybe we can meet on my trip upcoming to South Africa if we get a chance.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. Looking forward to see you.
All right. Anton, I'll let you drop off right there, and then I'll wrap up my broadcast here. Have a safe weekend, and thank you for your time.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
All right, folks, that's Anton van der Bijl from the Solidarity Union. He was talking to us about this employment equity decision that was reached through mediation through the International Labor Organization, an arm of the United Nations, of all organizations, talking about eliminating a race in decisions when it comes to employees. But as I hit correctly, it covers certain things, but not to the degree I believe. And my audience also hit this correctly, pointing out, what about this? What about that? I think Anton answered questions as best as possible. We appreciate that. Also, the gentleman asked a question about looking for employment. Werknet, there you go. That's something that I wasn't fully aware of. So hopefully that's something that can help you out. Go to their website and check it out. Let me go through and see if there's any last minute questions here before we wrap up. And again, my thanks to Anton van der Bijl. What else we got here? Anything? I'm just looking. All right. Frank Corp enjoyed it. Say. All right. Well, that's it then, folks. I'm going to wrap it up. I'll be on later today for the news here on Chris Wyatt Reports on the Adopt Africa channel, so you guys can tune in for that a little bit later on if you'd like. And that's going to wrap it up here. So thank you very much. Do appreciate it. Thank you so much. And we'll catch you later in the day. Cheers, everybody. Thanks a lot for your time. Be sure to hit that like button. And thanks to Bijl for getting all his family members to sign in. I do appreciate it. The thing is that while the numbers here may look lower than what the public sees, what you see and what I see, YouTube knows what the actual numbers are. So so don't be discouraged if you tune in and the world's falling apart and there's only 300 people watching the program, or if we're covering something that they don't want to hear, like Renee Funderpfeifer, and there's only 40 people show up, according to what you can see on the stats. Just hang in there, because it's actually a lot higher than that, and it irritates the platform. But things are marginally better since Sujin Wojo, Wookie, Sujin Wookie left the company, and it's a little bit better on YouTube, but it's still not quite back to a free speech platform, which it was before Google bought the platform. Anyway, thanks a lot, folks, and we'll catch you later today on the news right here. Appreciate your support. God bless and have a safe day. And if you don't come back, have a good weekend.